Okay, so what we're looking at here, it's so much more than just a diplomatic visit. This is really about a whole new kind of power play, right? A high-stakes strategy that's completely rewriting the rules for how influence works in the 21st century.
So you got to ask yourself, why? Why did a US vice president just take this historic trip to the South Caucasus? I mean, we're talking about a trip no sitting president or VP had ever made before. And they're not just there for show. They're signing some pretty major deals in Armenia and Azerbaijan. So sure, on the surface you see the handshakes, the photo ops, but underneath it all, this is the final, crucial move in a huge American play. So what is really going on here?
Right, and you have to understand, this trip didn't just happen out of the blue, not at all. It was the final piece of a very carefully planned puzzle. See, it all started back in August 2025 with this peace summit, where the whole idea was launched. Then, a few months later, that idea gets turned into a super detailed legal framework. And finally, boom. The VP's trip makes the whole thing real, makes it operational on the ground.
Okay, let's get into the specifics then. What was actually agreed upon during this trip? Because when you look at the deals that were signed, you start to see the sheer scale and ambition of this whole strategy. This is really where the handshakes turn into hard power.
So check this out. In Armenia, the US nails down a civil nuclear agreement, and, this is a big deal, they also sell them these VBAT reconnaissance drones. That normalizes the sale of Western defense tech in a really significant way. Then, the very next day in Azerbaijan, it's a completely different flavor. They sign this huge strategic partnership charter that's all about the future, you know. We're talking artificial intelligence, critical minerals, cybersecurity. These aren't just simple agreements, folks. They're signaling really deep long-term partnerships that go way beyond your standard diplomacy.
All right, so all of these individual deals, they're really just pieces of a much, much bigger project. In the scenario we're looking at, it's called the TRIPP corridor. That stands for the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. And here's the key thing to grasp. This so-called peace corridor is no longer just a nice-sounding slogan. It's been transformed from an idea into a real, tangible, contractual thing. And this gets us to the absolute core concept here, what we're calling corridor statecraft. Think about it like this. It's not just about building the physical stuff, you know, the railroad, the fiber optic cables. The real game is about building that infrastructure and this is the crucial part, writing the rules for it. Who controls the contracts, the security, the data? Who settles disputes? That's where the real lasting power is.
And if you want proof that this is a long-term vision, just look at this one number, 99. The entire framework for this corridor is built on a 49-year contract that can be extended for another 50 years. So we're talking about a potential 99-year deal. This is not some short-term political win. No way. This is a century-long strategic play designed to lock in American influence for generations, long after the politicians who signed it are gone.
So let's dive into those contractual details from that January 2026 framework, because this is where the genius of the strategy really shows. You've got that huge concession length, up to 99 years, which locks in a long-term U.S. presence. Then there's the revenue split. The U.S. gets a 26% cut initially. This isn't aid. This gives Washington direct skin in the game, a real economic stake. And finally, security. The contract allows for private operational personnel. You see what's happening? Each and every one of these clauses is designed to weave a Western security and management footprint right into the daily operations of the corridor.
Okay, so we've talked about the what and the how, but now we get to the most important question. Why? What are the ultimate goals here? Because this corridor, it's not the end goal. It's a tool, a very powerful physical tool designed to achieve three big overlapping U.S. objectives.
It really boils down to this three-layered strategy. Step 1, bypass. The goal here is to create vital trade routes that completely circumvent Russia and Iran. You literally build a path around them, shrinking their leverage and their influence in the region. Step 2, access. This is all about securing reliable pathways for critical stuff to get to Western markets. We're talking minerals from Central Asia that are absolutely essential for our tech. And finally, step 3, leverage. This is the future play. It's about embedding U.S. technology and, more importantly, U.S. standards into the digital backbone of the region. Things like AI data centers and semiconductor supply chains. Whoever builds that infrastructure gets to set the rules.
Now, obviously, a move this big on the global stage doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? You can't just drop a new, powerful piece onto the middle of the Eurasian chessboard and expect the other players to just sit there. They have to react. So let's take a look at how the rest of the world is responding to this.
From Moscow's point of view, this is a disaster. It's not just a setback, it's a structural loss of influence. The US is basically taking advantage of the fact that Russia's attention and resources are stretched thin elsewhere. And in a brilliant, almost painful move, they're taking something that Russia used to control, the long-running conflict in the region, and turning it into the very foundation for a permanent Western institutional presence.
And what about Iran? Well, for Tehran, this whole thing creates some serious anxiety on two different levels. First, there's the geographic fear, right? They call it strategic enclosure. Suddenly, you've got this massive US-managed project running right along your northern border. That's unsettling. But then there's the economic fear. Iran has its own dreams of being a major transit hub, and this new corridor is direct competition. It threatens to undercut their entire plan.
Now, China's reaction is really interesting because it's completely different from Russia's or Iran's. For Beijing, it's not about the physical road. They don't care that much about the concrete and the steel. What they care about is the software layer. Who's going to control the data that flows through this corridor? Whose insurance rules will apply? Whose compliance standards will everyone have to follow? In this new great game, these questions about who writes the rules, well, that's everything.
And you know, it's not just adversaries who are worried. Even a NATO ally like Turkey has to be a little concerned. On the one hand, sure, they'll benefit from all the trade passing through, but this quote really nails the risk for them. Turkey risks becoming the indispensable passage but not the indispensable architect. In other words, they could just end up being the highway that everyone else uses without getting a say in designing the regional order on their own terms.
So, let's bring this all together. What's the big takeaway from all of this? It really all comes down to a fundamental shift in the very nature of great power competition. This is the new great game, and the currency is governance.
And this is what makes the whole strategy so incredibly efficient, so powerful. You've got this one single 43-kilometer strip of land in the South Caucasus, and it sits at the perfect intersection of three massive U.S. foreign policy goals. About 40% of the effort is aimed at degrading Russia's regional monopoly. Another 30% is about tightening the screws on Iran. And the final 30% is all about setting the standards in the long-term competition with China. One project, three objectives. It's geopolitical multitasking.
So the key point, the one thing you should remember from this is this. The 21st century contest isn't about who builds the road anymore. It's about who writes the rules for the road. What we're seeing is physical infrastructure being used as a Trojan horse, a vehicle for exporting something much more powerful and much more lasting. American governance, American rules, American influence. The real prize isn't the hardware, it's the operating system.
And so that leaves us with one final big question to think about. In a world that's more and more connected, where the physical and digital are constantly merging, is control over the network actually more powerful than control over the territory itself? Maybe the ultimate power no longer belongs to those who own the land, but to those who write the code for how we all live on it.